Welcome to Maps and Meta-Analysis.
Looking at California cities. Hi, I'm Darvesh
And I'm Justin Hurst, and this is Facts and Folsom.
a meta-analysis. Hey guys, welcome to episode, this is 11, I think.
Yeah, we're up there now.
Yeah, double
finally,
digits.
Double digits.
Yeah, yeah, so this week we're going to be talking about the most recent city council meeting that happened on the 9th of May, so just a couple days ago. It was pretty brief overall. The big topic that night was the basically the proposed budget from the city manager and her team.
Which will be a future discussion in the upcoming city council meetings because this was just the presentation of it.
Yeah.
They'll actually get to vote and do public hearings on it in the subsequent weeks.
Yeah, exactly. So like the city council members were explicitly not allowed to ask questions during this presentation because it is just a proposal. Ultimately, the debate kind of goes back and forth. And I believe the last day that they have to make any changes is up till June 30th. Otherwise, whatever is basically instated at that time is the budget for the subsequent year. And there's kind of some broad themes in the budget that we'll kind of go over. It's stuff that we've alluded to earlier, but that we'll kind of like dive more into detail. But to kind of start out with, we'll go through some of the other agenda items really quickly, and then we'll just dive right into the budget proposal.
So I came in a little bit late, so I will talk a little bit more on the budget proposal side, especially because that's also one of my areas of interest. So Darvesh, if you don't mind, can you start off with the beginning of the meeting?
Yeah, totally. So the first item, so actually one of the interesting things, I missed a little bit of the first part too, and procedurally one of the things I found kind of interesting was, I think there was so agenda item 12, which was resolution number 11035, a resolution authorizing city manager to execute a memorandum of understanding, an MOU, with the Folsom Historic District Association for operation of an ice rink on city property. And I didn't understand the full contents of this because I came in like kind of towards the middle. But I found it procedurally kind of interesting that the city council could pull out something from the consent calendar and put it before any of the other items. Because it was clear that this item was discussed way before the actual like scheduled presentations, which I found to be procedurally just kind of odd. Because I thought the whole point was that the consent calendar was kind of in the middle and that those things were kind of passed as a group, and if anything were to be pulled out, it would have to be after the scheduled presentations. So I don't know, I just found that kind of interesting. It did seem like it was an urgent matter. I think basically the historic district wanted to send a check to reserve an ice rink for, basically Folsom has like this ice rink that happens like during every like kind of holiday season, around like December, like November or December time. And you need to reserve it obviously like way in advance, so that they can set up the logistics and everything to set it up in time. And I guess there was some back and forth with the city about like, were they going to get approved for that kind of money and so on and so forth. So I think that's why the item might have been pulled out, but yeah, again, procedurally just a little interesting. Then the first official item, the first of the scheduled presentations, was the introduction of the new Parks and Recreation Director, Kelly Gonzalez. It was, it was pretty like standard kind of introduction. Different people talked about, her history up to this point. I think she served on one of the like Greater Sacramento like Parks and Rec departments, so she clearly like had experience in this field. But one question it kind of brought to mind was, do all the directors serve under the city manager? Because it seemed like that was the implication based on the introduction, which I would think like that would be kind of interesting, and that would again kind of speak to this, not as public-facing power that the city manager has. And so
my understanding is yes, they do all report to the city manager. Whether or not there's someone in between, I don't think so, but I don't know for sure. But that is very much the administrative side of the city, so the city manager is the ultimate like authority there.
Interesting, yeah. So I don't know, I just found that bureaucratically kind of interesting because it seems like, you have to win the support of the city council, so like the public support, but ultimately you have to be the right person that the city manager would want, as far as like experience and skill and whatnot. So yeah. Then there was so the second item was the proclamation of the mayor. Proclamation of the mayor of the city of Folsom, proclaiming May 14th through 20th, 2023 as National Police Officers Memorial Week in the city of Folsom. So this is basically just recognizing, police officers who have kind of put their life on the line in their line of work, obviously. And it was pretty terse, there were 2 officers who came to kind of collect the prize and say a few words to kind of thank the public and the council. And it seemed like everyone was generally supportive of them, and they kind of like alluded to that in their statement. Trash cans. Okay, and then the third item was the proclamation of the mayor of the city of Folsom, proclaiming the month of May 2023 as National Skin Cancer Awareness Month. So I guess there was someone who actually did a TEDx Folsom talk, and they talked about skin cancer, and Mayor Rodriguez, she, I guess, was attending it.
Okay.
And I think the student basically asked, like, hey, like, will you announce this as like an important issue in the city council? And I guess the mayor agreed. So that's how it came about. And, but yeah, he seemed like a pretty young man, like 17, I think he said he was. So yeah, I mean, it's awesome to see young people kind of get involved in the city, like in like local. I mean, this is not like really getting involved in like local politics, but at least interfacing with that system at a young age. So.
And anything I called an action of the city is definitely like a form of political speech and being active in your community.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Then quite a big presentation from the HART of Folsom. So this is the Homeless Assistance Resource Team, and basically they are kind of the like homeless advocacy group that operates within Folsom. So they partner with different organizations. I think there's HART programs basically in various cities around Sacramento County, and so sometimes they have to coordinate resources and like capacity, those kind of things. And so they basically they provide a winter shelter from January 8th, or so this year they provided it from January 8th to March 25th, and it generally varies, I think, year to year, just depending on how the season is and how many resources there are available, how many volunteers show up, like those kind of things. And so they gave some of the stats about the homeless population in Folsom, the homeless population that they serve, because not all of them are necessarily like from Folsom or tied to Folsom in any specific way. And so just see the breakdown of that was kind of interesting. So I'll run through some of the statistics. Oh, and then this was all led by Beverly Seas, but I don't know how to spell her last name. So if anyone listening to this podcast knows who that is, I honestly should have looked it up in like the agenda items, but pronunciation wise, I'm pretty sure I'm getting it right. I just don't know the specific spelling. So if someone knows that, or Beverly, you want to reach out, if you want to actually be interviewed on, Facts of Folsom, like, please reach out. So let's see. One of the things that they mentioned were host sites are harder to come by. So host sites were typically churches in this case. So, excuse me. Basically, churches would kind of offer up spare room that they had as like beds, and these beds could obviously only fit like a certain number of people per night, and so since they were running out of capacity, each church would basically have dozens and dozens of beds. So having one church gone could significantly affect the capacity in Folsom. And this is kind of interesting. So how did each guest basically hear about HART? And so 35% heard it from family and friends, 25% from social services, and 21% from previous guests. And I wonder what the intersection of that is, because that could be like kind of a Venn diagram, like a three-way Venn diagram. They served 994 guest nights. So this is basically like one person stays one night, that's like one guest night. So if like 30 people stay one night, that's like 30 guest nights. So it was kind of like a normalized metric. Do
they have an average amount of nights per guest?
That's a good question, actually. I think they did. I want to say it was like somewhere between like 12 and 19. It was something like more than a dozen, but like less than 20.
Okay.
Something like that.
So it's not just a few people.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's definitely not people just like staying one night and then leaving.
Yeah.
The average age was 44. The youngest was 20, and the oldest was 77. And it was about a 66 to 34% split between men and women. So 66% men, 34% women. And then about 40 to 50% of them had been resident. They broke it down by like different time periods, but it added up to roughly between like 40 and 50% who have been residents of Folsom sometime in the last 5 years. So either they've been a resident, within the last 1 year, or 2, 3, 4, up to 5. And 9% are veterans. 37% have an income of some kind, and 6% have a job on arrival, which I thought was kind of fascinating. Oh, this is also pretty fascinating. 81% have Medicaid or Medicare. And so, yeah, I don't know. It kind of brought up. I guess let me kind of punt this to you, which is, is this kind of a failure of these programs to not accommodate kind of well enough? Meaning like it's not like these people are completely detached from any other social programs. In fact, they do have access to, a pretty good amount of social programs.
Yeah.
So do you feel like, maybe I shouldn't frame it in terms of like failing or succeeding, but do you think there is a kind of a lack of maybe a lack of depth in these resources, or do you think maybe the resources are adequate and we don't have the right kind of resources?
I would say probably more towards the latter.
Okay.
I think it speaks to, without some more information, which I'll get into in a minute, perhaps it speaks to the compartmentalization way that the state and federal government have done social services. There's not like a generally one size fits all, like here you go, one-stop shop, like program for all of your needs. Especially when it comes to, I think, like housing, healthcare, looking for a job. Those are all a bunch of different big buckets, not including anything like childcare. So, even if people are covered under Medicare, which is a good thing, they might not necessarily have a bunch of the other needs met. Some of the other things that I would be interested in hear about too is like how recently people who, like what that Venn diagram might be of people who are covered under Medicare but don't currently have a job, people who just lost a job, people who have coverage still that they were in before becoming housing insecure or homeless, versus people who got into that program afterwards. Like, I think that more granular data would also speak maybe to one of those points versus the other.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, actually, yeah, maybe I should reach out to the HART program in Folsom, because, I mean, I guess with my, like, data science skills, maybe I could help them provide some kind of insight, because, because they provide this winter shelter kind of like once a year, it could be really useful to kind of use most of the year to analyze the previous year's data and to try to better prepare a set of services. Like, for example, they mentioned how, some days they had people with, or they had like doctors and nurses on site, at various like host sites to kind of treat medical conditions. And so it would be kind of interesting to know, like, okay, earlier in the season, is it better to have doctors? Like, if you have a 12-week program and you can only choose like 2 weeks to have a physician on hand, which 2 weeks would be kind of the most valuable? Maybe it would be weeks 1 and 2, because, the people coming into that program then, but I mean, this is all just like speculation, but this is kind of like an example of how data could be used to utilize like existing limited resources to their kind of maximal benefit.
Are those doctors that are coming in, are they volunteering, or are they being paid in some form?
I believe they're volunteering. I believe a lot of this relies just on just like plain volunteer efforts, because it did seem like a lot of the resources were donated. Obviously, a lot of like the beds and host sites are donated. Yeah. They even mentioned a shower trailer, so those would be like tens of thousands of dollars to even rent. But I believe there's some business in either Folsom or El Dorado Hills that like let the HART Folsom rent it out. Okay. And so I think a lot of it is based on charity, and so I don't know. To me, that makes it even more prudent to try to use those resources as effectively as possible. But okay. What else did I have? Oh, they had over 120 volunteers, which is pretty heartwarming that people in Folsom are getting involved. Something I wish I participated in, now that I think about it, because it was running January through March. I don't know. Wish I could have participated, but yeah, maybe next time. Then let's see. Oh, okay. It was District Church that donated a shower trailer.
Oh, so, okay.
And actually, I don't know where District Church is. Do you know where that is?
I mean, I can look it up real quick.
Okay. No worries. Okay. While he's looking that up, I'll go through some of the other points. Actually, okay. That was pretty much the end of what I had there. But I guess maybe some thoughts to wrap it up. It did seem like, maybe one thing I didn't take notes about that was still covered in the line of questioning by the city is, it seems like the council members are quite reticent to bring up the elephant in the room, which is that most of the residents of Folsom don't really want to volunteer any resources, like any of their own like personal resources to help the homeless because of the implication that basically the more attractive you make a location for people who are unhoused, the more unhoused people are going to flock there. And there's kind of a stereotype associated with people who are unhoused that like they're all drug addicts, they're all like violent, you know, they're all kind of like criminals and things like that. And so, which is, I mean, yeah, I don't know. We're not going to get into like the specifics of like why those stereotypes exist or like what to do about them specifically. But I think the larger point is that there's clearly this clash between the interests of the kind of layperson within Folsom and this very pressing need that actually has to happen. One, I guess, one argument that I personally don't agree with, but that I can empathize from an argumentative point of view, is that if only 40 or 50% of the residents have some tie to Folsom, then it would behoove us to, try to use Folsom's resources more effectively towards that homeless population. So basically, like if we were able to take the kind of the same quantity of resources and concentrate it on that like roughly half of the unhoused population that it visits the HART program, in this winter shelter, and presumably throughout the year as well, that maybe that would be a better use of just like Folsom's resources in general. However, I think the counter argument to that is that a lot of these resources kind of go unused if there's no one else, like basically if you have like a bed in a host site, for example, and there's just not enough people to fill them, but you have all the churches and the beds available, it seems kind of, I don't know, it just seems like you could use those resources and those resources would benefit someone, and it's not marginally that much more work for the host sites or for the people volunteering. So you kind of might as well, same thing with food. If you're already bringing, a large amount of food, then the kind of incremental cost to go from feeding, let's say 90 people to 100 people is not actually as much as going from, 0 to 50 or 0 to 90, for example. So that would be kind of my personal counter argument to that. However, I do understand it. I don't know if there are like grants and things from the county to address homelessness and the unhoused and things like that. Do you know about any such programs? Or?
Not my area of expertise.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know much.
But yeah, I mean that would be something that I guess I personally would be willing to advocate. Is like if there was some I don't know, some kind of like stipend that a city could get if they are helping, let's say, like more residents from outside of their jurisdiction. For example, like if like 80% of the people that you're helping are from like outside of your city, like maybe you could get like a stipend to cover like each person's kind of like material cost. Material isn't like, okay, we'll pay for like so many beds and so many like nights of food. We'll take like whatever the average stay is and just basically like cover that kind of cost. So yeah, that could be kind of one idea, but something I'll definitely keep following, going forward. I don't know, it's just like one of my personal areas of interest. Anything you want to add?
Oh no, just to get back, that church is located in El Dorado Hills.
Gotcha. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. So that kind of wraps it up for the rest of the scheduled presentations. We'll get into the proposed budget by the city manager, and I'll let Justin take that away.
Yeah. So again, this was just a proposal. Not really a lot of room for discussion, but I think that this was presented both initially by the city manager herself, and then the majority of the presentation was given by the CFO, Chief Financial Officer for the city, who works for the city manager. I think that she did a great job really outlining a lot of the considerations that went into this budget proposal. They talked a lot about like the trade-offs and the general economic situation of Folsom, especially with a little bit of a 5-year projection at the end. Overall, the city is definitely facing a tough few years ahead of us. We're facing increasing expenses at the same time not being able to adequately address all of the different needs that we've had in the past few years while keeping up for increases in cost of living. So an example of this is there's been a lot of deferred maintenance from previous years just due to budgetary shortfalls and tough choices having to be made. So the budget that was proposed didn't address any of those deferred maintenance. There's also not any proposed growth in the emergency fund for the city, and that's something that's actually projected to be drawn upon into the future without any increases in tax revenue. Beyond the standard like property rate tax increase year to year or sales tax increase. Ultimately, that the budget proposed also does not draw on the city's emergency rainy day funds, which was an intentional choice by the city manager. I think that typically is considered a best practice if you can avoid drawing on your rainy day funds, especially in a year where it's like we're not facing another pandemic right now, and we could fear theoretically in the future, so might want to save it. There is millions of dollars in capital improvements that has been unfunded in previous years. That is also going to be unfunded this year with the theoretical hope that it could be funded in future years, but that wasn't specifically addressed as much. Some of the other common themes are labor costs are being projected to rise, especially as the city of Folsom wants to remain a competitive employer, drawing a lot of talent to the region, so that way we're not overshadowed by the surrounding, like Sacramento on one side and El Dorado Hills on the other. The city manager's office also had some plugs to advocate for some due diligence and financial scrutiny from the city council for both this budgetary year and future years, especially when you get into the situation where you have to make these tough choices. Like, it becomes more prudent to be a little bit more choosy where you do spend your money, because if you run into any tricky situations and you don't have enough money in reserves or on hand, then you're screwed. Getting a little bit more into the weeds and the numbers, they expect and project a 5% increase in the general revenue for the city, which translates to about $5.4 million. Their total general fund proposed budget comes out to be about $108.6 million, which I think was a few million more than this year.
Yeah, I believe it was 102 million this year.
Yeah, so about 6 more.
Yeah, which kind of actually makes sense with like 5%. Like 5% of 102 is like about 5 million.
Yeah. Expenditures have been balanced with the proposed budget, as I believe they are required to do so, with $4.1 million being the cost of service increases alone. Most of this is reflected in salary and benefit raises. Over $700,000 as a single ticket was added to specifically address the fire department overtime pay, which has been discussed in previous podcast episodes, with a lot more smaller ticket items for like cost of service increases like operation and maintenance. This also takes into account the $214,000 for the 2 added community service officer positions for the police department that was added a couple of city council meetings ago.
We actually covered the debate on that quite thoroughly. So I want to say it was maybe episode like 3 or 4. I can't remember the exact one, but we'll try to put it in like the show notes.
Yeah. Some of the other general areas of growth that they had to account for in this budget was additional service positions for the Folsom Plan area. As that part of Folsom continues to grow, we need more resources for those new residents. So examples for this are 2 firefighter positions specifically for that area, a police officer addition, other upgrades for existing fire departments and police departments, and then starting of an IT capital fund, which I hope we'll hear more about in the future, because that was a quick little item here. Unfortunately, one statistic that I think really shows how difficult of a situation the city of Folsom is in is of all the budget requests that the city manager's office received, less than 10% have been fulfilled in this budget proposal. So there's a lot of different areas of ideas for where we could be spending our money that currently we don't have big enough pie to be sharing it everywhere. Some of the authorized positions have points to reflect what is full-time versus part-time, which was a little bit confusing in the presentation. Like when they did a breakdown of all the different positions that were funded in the budget, I think I remember seeing something that was like 102.4 positions. And
yes, yeah. So yeah. I think we were talking about this like during the meeting. My hypothesis there was that sometimes things are funded in the middle of the year. So typically, like in a yearly budget, there's some kind of slack left over for kind of like miscellaneous expenses, such that you don't actually have to dip into your emergency funds or like capital improvement funds and so on and so forth.
Really quick, that unassigned funds is called the unassigned general fund balance, and that comes out to about 20% of the proposed budget.
Yeah. So when I refer to like the kind of emergency fund, that's what I'm talking about. The unassigned, or is the unassigned fund balance just like the delta between the kind of like proposed yearly budget and like what the expenditures are? Right, because I see what you're saying. Or sorry, what I'm trying to get at is the kind of emergency fund as we think about it. It's like a separate fund that you actually have to like deposit money into.
Yes, so
Whereas
that's a separate bank account that's like not really factoring into this budget right now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So is that what you're referring to when you refer to the unassigned fund balance? Or is the unassigned fund balance just the kind of gap in any one particular year?
It's that buffer.
Okay.
So it's not the emergency fund.
Got it. Okay.
Thank you for that clarification.
Okay. No worries. Because I think these can be like kind of confusing terms, and they're they're intentionally intended to be very like I don't want to say bureaucratic, but like incredibly specific.
Yeah.
Like because you don't want to just say like rainy day fund, like that doesn't sound very official. But yeah, sorry, I interrupted you. Continue.
No, you're good. The last of the numbers before getting into the 5-year forecast that they ended with is that sales tax, they have to project it because they don't really know yet, is estimated to be about $29.2 million, which of course all these projections don't account for if we do end up in another recession. And then property taxes are estimated to be about $40 million in the next year. So they, as I mentioned, they did end the presentation with a 5-year forecast for the city. And then they had 10 big takeaways. So I'll just go down the list real quick. And then if I miss anything in this entire presentation, Darvesh will let me know. Number one, they have a general fund structural deficit that will continue to increase in the next 5 years. By the end of that time, we are expecting a $4.6 million-ish funding gap between the revenue that the city is bringing in from existing tax structure and the existing expenses, assuming a current level of service is maintained for the city. Secondly, there is a projected unassigned fund balance, the thing that we just discussed, to cover the shortfalls. That will drop to about 5% of the budget, according to current projections, in 5 years' time, which means there's less room to work with, again, if the city does not address revenue shortfalls. Ultimately, the sales tax is flattening, so they did show a graph in their presentation. Sales tax up until, what was it, 2016-ish? Was raising at a higher rate than it currently is, and since around 2016, it's been averaging growth of 2.3% per year, which is lower, which is, again, like contributing towards that gap.
Yeah, it was pretty like markedly different, and it was clear that the trend was very much like pre-COVID. I mean, there's a tiny dip in the pandemic, but largely the trend pretty much changed. So I think the trend initially was very much in line with the property tax revenue. So basically, for every amount that the property tax increased, the sales tax increased sort of a commensurate amount. And then in 2016, they sort of decoupled. So property taxes are continuing to go up, and in fact, in the last few years, it's actually been going up at like a slightly higher rate than normal. But the sales tax has been, I mean, it's not flat, but like you said, it's growing at a much was rate than the property tax revenue.
And being one of the two main sources of revenue for the city, that is very concerning for future projections.
Was there anything else in the?
Yeah, so the fourth item was really interesting, actually. I'm glad that they included this slide. They included the top 25 sales tax generators in the town, which amounted to between the $13 million of revenue per year, which they, I don't know if this was a way of suggesting to city council another way to make revenue, but they said that would be the equivalent of about a 0.5% increase in sales tax citywide if they were to do that. So theoretically speaking, if the city council wanted to generate another $13 million a year, that would be 0.5% in sales tax if they chose to raise it.
Yeah, and this would be in addition to California sales tax.
Yeah.
So all of these taxes are supplementary to the existing sales tax. And also, one interesting thing from that slide was they said those 25 businesses accounted for 58% of all of the sales tax revenue. So like the 13 million is like the absolute amount, but like on a percentage basis of all the sales tax revenue, those 25 businesses contribute about 58%.
And to give you some examples, they were the bigger stores like Walmart and Costco. Like I guess the usual suspects you would think of when you have a lot of different people who are needing to use these services to go shopping.
Yeah, also many car dealerships. I think I saw at least like 4 or 5 different car dealerships.
The fifth item they had is they have about $20 million annually that will be unfunded or underfunded from those deferments going into the future. By the end of the 5-year period. So that's another additional expense that the city might want to consider if they do raise revenue somehow. The sixth item being there is a contribution that the city of Folsom is expected to pay into for CalPERS retirement funds. And I guess there's some political uncertainty about how that's going to look in the future, so that makes it a little bit hard to estimate. The seventh item being generally speaking, as the Folsom Plan area continues to grow, there will continue to be new service infrastructure that will need to be put in place to support that. So they do reflect that a little bit in this year's budget, but that's also something that will need to be considered for future budgets. The eighth item is that it's going to be a challenge to remain a competitive employer in the region, especially as nearby cities are continuing to increase their salaries and benefits, and the cost of labor is such a high percentage of some of the funding needs in the city. The ninth item is that currently the trend has been that there's been a depletion of our reserves in the city, with little ability forecasted outside of raising additional revenue to be able to replenish that. And there was a little bit of a contribution that they recommended. I think it was like $50,000 to that fund in this budget. But if we were to continue that $50,000 contribution indefinitely into the future, to get back to pre-COVID levels, we would need 66 years of that $50,000 in the budget to give you an idea of how much that has dropped in the past few years.
Yeah, it was kind of remarkable, and I mean, pretty much. I think the numbers speak for themselves.
Yeah, and then the last point comes directly from that. Low reserves threaten the future ability of the city to fund services. If we get to a point where the city is operating at a structural deficit and is not able to compensate with their reserves, they're going to consider cutting services, because that's just, they'll need to be able to balance their own budget.
Yeah.
So ultimately speaking, the near term looks okay for Folsom, but there's a lot of long term things that can pile on if the city isn't prudent about thinking about its economic future.
Yeah. I don't know. Do you have any personal thoughts on this, or what were some of your takeaways and questions after the presentation, or even during the presentation?
Yeah. I guess I'm curious to see if the city council will approve the budget as is. I think it's been clear to me in some of the past city council meetings when there have been budgetary items discussed that there is a little bit of a misalignment of priorities between the city council and the city manager's office. I think a good example of this is the community service officers positions that were funded. Yeah,
I was going to say that's the pretty hallmark example of where this becomes a very salient question.
Yeah, where I think the city manager's office has a duty in that position to be thinking about the city on a very long-term basis and planning for its financial future. So I think there may be a fundamental misalignment between that and some of the values of the city council members, where if they have a specific focus, like for example community safety, then sometimes that value set can justify an additional expense. So I'm curious to see. I think next week will be interesting, the discussion, the back and forth. I personally, I don't expect them to not make any changes. I'm curious to see if they're going to dip into that $50K that's going to be sent to the reserves in the proposed plan. I feel like that might be reassigned, but I guess we'll see in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I remember, though actually one big question I had during the presentation was when they showed those 25 businesses, one thing that kind of struck me was all of those businesses take up a very large square foot area. And so one thing I was thinking about was okay, yeah, of course Costco has a ton of sales tax because it just sells a bunch of stuff. But, if you were to put, multiple smaller retailers that, used up the same kind of square foot area, would you actually get more sales tax revenue from that? And I have a suspicion that that answer is probably yes. I also think with things like car dealerships, because cars are such an infrequent purchase, and because people buying cars have the ability to obviously just drive around. I mean, it's such a large purchase that you're willing to, go within a pretty large radius to find a car, or even find a used car, for example. If you can't, or if you don't want to, let's say, buy a new car. I mean, either because you can't afford it or you just don't want to do it. There's so many options available to you that it seems like not the best strategy long term to depend on that as a stable source of sales tax income. Also, one thing that came to mind for me, and I doubt this would have had any effect in 2016, but maybe more recently it has an effect. But places like Tesla, now they sell directly to their consumers, right? You just configure your car online and then you go pick it up. So there is no car dealership intermediary that is taking a cut of that revenue, and therefore there's no sales tax going to the city in which that car dealership is located. And I don't think it's just Tesla. It seems like a more popular trend that has been occurring I guess specifically for EVs, but I'm not sure like why it necessarily ties to EVs, but basically I think even companies like Ford, you know, when they sell their like F-150 Lightning, you could just configure it online and then go pick it up. I mean, maybe you do pick it up at like a Ford dealership or something.
Typically, I think you would.
So but I'm not sure whether that's actually counted in the sales tax revenue. I remember actually talking to someone from the Chamber of Commerce, and they mentioned actually a key distinction of online ordering. So if you order online from a site like Amazon and you just have it delivered to your door, then the city does not collect any sales tax revenue. However, if you do like the in-store pickup option, so for example, you know, let's say I order from Amazon, but I pick it up at Whole Foods, the city actually does get the sales tax revenue. So they get that extra, like, you know, probably like less than a percentage point or something on that transaction. But I mean, that can make a huge difference where the same, the same retail that was going to a resident of Folsom is, you know, now actually being properly accounted for.
Yeah.
Whereas in most cases, if it's delivery, then it's not really accounted for. So I suspect that, you know, maybe with car dealerships, that is like a similar dynamic where if you like pick up a car, you know, you're not getting that sales tax revenue. And because it's such a big ticket item, I suspect that, you know, maybe that has a large effect on the overall sales tax revenue total. I guess the other thing I'm kind of curious about, you know, something I thought about after the city council meeting is what exactly, and I genuinely don't mean this in like a pejorative way, but like, what does competitiveness mean for hiring people for administrative roles within the city of Folsom, or let's say like any city government? Like, what is the type of expertise that you're even looking for? And it also doesn't seem like they really have any intention of reaching out to younger, less experienced people and then kind of, I don't know, incubating them. It seems like a lot of the people who join the city, and of course, this is only from what I've observed of the city of Folsom, and I don't really speak for other cities, but it seems like they typically pick people who are quite late in their professional career. And, you know, I guess, do you suspect that dynamic has anything to play with it? Or do you have some insight into what might make these kind of hiring decisions quite tricky, you know, given your experience in UC Davis?
Yeah, honestly, like, even though I know Folsom is a city we've lived in for most of our lives, it's hard to say. I don't know where all the vacancies currently exist in the city. It's not like they're adding a whole lot of new positions outside of maybe police officers. But generally speaking, you know, it is a bit of a buzzword saying we want to remain competitive. What that means can be like, oh, higher starting bonuses, you can have higher expected raises, you can have better benefits. But how that manifests in terms of the city remains to be seen. I haven't really heard anyone say anything specific on that, or what competitive even means in this context. Like, do we want to be 5% better than our neighbor, or do we want to be at a commensurate rate? In terms of positions, I think I do get the sense that it's more higher level positions. I think it applies more to higher level positions, especially since we're not adding a lot of new positions. I think it makes more sense that it's more to fill vacancies that currently exist. Yeah, but those are my thoughts on that. I wish I knew more about the city and the current positions that are opening, or what they meant by competitive.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. So I don't even necessarily mean in like the amount of jobs or like the amount of vacancies and things like that. I'm just wondering like what makes that skill set so, I don't know, particularly competitive in that context, right? Whereas like I think the maybe just to like lay it out, I think the pejorative case would be something like, hey, they're just a bunch of bureaucrats. They're like paper pushers. You know, all they're doing is just kind of like being interlocutors between businesses and the kind of local government and the bylaws that are saved there. So, you know, what's the big deal? Like, can't you just hire someone, you know, straight out of college, or maybe someone who's like kind of younger in their career? And then I think the counter argument to that would be, you know, hey, you want people who are quite experienced in things like accounting and things like, you know, the law, so that they can properly interpret and contribute to the city of Folsom, which, you know, maybe it can't offer like the same thing as a private enterprise, but it can offer a much more stable career. And that is the incentive you need for people to kind of switch their career tracks into something that contributes to like the city government. So it may not seem that large in the grand scheme of things, but because it has to be funded from like sales tax and property tax and things like that, you need to make sure you really hire like quality people and the right people for the right job in order to, you know, have a sustainable, thriving city in the long term.
I would say my only addition I would add with that additional context is and again, this is all just supposition.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this is just supposition on our part. We're just trying to get a better understanding because I personally don't like these like kind of buzzwordy things where it's like, oh, we gotta like remain competitive. It's like, no, like I want numbers. Like what are the raises that people are asking for? Like what are the skill sets that you're looking for? Because you know, when young people like us go to the city council meeting, it's like we want to know how we can contribute. We might know someone who would want to move to a place like this. Like I was actually just talking to a friend in who's currently like in St. Louis, and you know, he's very much like the type of person who would want to live in a place like Folsom. So you know, if there were some like software engineering job, because he's like a software engineer, you know, if there were some like software engineering job, like I'm sure he would really like Folsom, and you know, I would love to advocate work in Folsom if that was like a viable thing. But I can't do it if we're just in this like kind of sort of like nebulous cloud of, you know, words and kind of vague ideas. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is just if it really is just these government level positions, you know, you can say mid to high skill level, you're expected to have some sort of bachelor degree. I think maybe the biggest thing is being so close to Sacramento that there's a lot more and higher paying jobs in Sacramento, which is why the city of Folsom feels like they need to compete specifically with that region. Just like from what knowledge I have of state jobs, I mean, they're considered to be really safe and secure, the pay is pretty good, the benefits are great. So I can see why there would be a need on the part of the city to try to retain some of that talent more locally.
Interesting. So do you think there's like a pressure of, you know, whatever rate the state is increasing their salary and their benefits and things like that, like in order to remain competitive, Folsom might have to be more or less commensurate to that. Maybe not in absolute terms, but in terms of like that rate of increase. And that could be the.
I would expect exactly that.
Interesting. Okay, that's a really fascinating theory because that totally makes sense. Is like if you're in Folsom, there's not much of an opportunity cost to working for the state, especially now that a lot of roles are remote.
Yeah.
And so the idea is like, okay, well, like the locality doesn't really make a difference, and if I'm making like the same or more money with the same or more security, then I might as well try my hand at that instead of like local government and things like that.
Yeah, and even if you have to go in the office like a couple of days a week with some of the positions that are like more hybrid, you know, driving half an hour or to an hour like once or twice a week is not going to be as big a deal.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's a very fascinating reason. I want to see, like, I wrote some notes, but I think we covered almost everything. Oh yeah, I think we also this might be the topic of like a future episode, but we kind of want to investigate, you know, what could be the potential causes, or I should say this: we want to look at what factors might be correlated with the flattening of sales tax revenue in 2016, in the fiscal year of 2016-2017. Because, you know, obviously we have our theories, but the idea is we want to be more data driven, and we want to actually have kind of like testable hypotheses that the city could use. I mean, obviously the situation is dire and that like the deficit's going to grow larger, but we do actually have an opportunity to, you know, make a change in the near term, right? You know, if it's something as simple as like prioritizing, you know, some kind of business licenses over others. I mean, that's something that's totally within the, you know, planning commission's purview. You know, where, you know, let's say they have, I don't know, the bandwidth to approve like 50 licenses. If they can at least like prioritize the most important ones first, you know, that could still be a huge win for the city, and it could make like an incremental increase to the sales tax revenue. And also, like, even if it's, even if some of our hypotheses are wrong, it's at least good to know and test what for sure isn't working. Yeah. Because I think all of these things in our heads sound like great narratives. Right? I think so much of, you know, both national and local politics is a lot about like constructing these narratives that we have based on our prior experience. And sometimes it can just be hard to like see the data and be like, oh, this doesn't make sense with anyone's worldview. And somehow we just have to like live with this and figure out what to do. Yeah. So hopefully we can do that. I guess I personally want to try to incorporate that in like Folsom maps in some way. I would love to do that, maybe like that square foot analysis somehow, where we could take like the 25 businesses and, you know, see like, okay, where in the jurisdiction of Folsom are they, you know, or maybe we can even do like what area within Folsom, like what percentage of the area in Folsom do they take up, and what percentage of the sales tax revenue do they make up? Because I would even be interested, like, because even on a like total region basis, we could be like, oh, like, you know, 80% of Folsom contributes like I don't know, 42% of the sales tax revenue or something like that. So
I mean,
anyway,
I could think of doing like a regression with a bunch of different factors with those 25 businesses, like, you know, distance to nearest freeway, population density of the area, things like that.
Yeah, that'll be interesting too. Like we could even do some kind of like higher dimensional like clustering. So there's techniques like what are called like k-means, where you basically like you can have a lot of these like numerical variables, and you can kind of like cluster things into like, you know, kind of like a 2D group, and you can say you know basically like there might be certain categories of businesses that are not obvious based on the type of business they are. So for example, like you could have a cluster that is made up of certain kinds of like retail and you know, restaurant and I don't know, like gym or something like that. And maybe there's something about like that combination in that like part of Folsom that just works like particularly well. And so you could like you can kind of like slice and dice the businesses in Folsom in a much more nuanced way with these kind of tools, rather than just looking at these aggregate things where you say like, oh man, like Costco is bringing in the most money, and you're like, okay, I mean, which is, that's like not a that's not really like that useful of a thing, because I think the CFO was kind of mentioning like, oh, we would basically need like another Costco and like another, you know, set of customers that already shop at Costco to like shop at this like new Costco to gain like this incremental revenue, which like that doesn't seem like a realistic proposition by any stretch of the imagination. Like I don't even know of like that many places in Folsom that could house another Costco. Other than the Folsom Ranch area, but that's like a stone's throw from the current Costco.
Yeah, I mean, functionally speaking, it wouldn't really make a lot of sense to invest in another Costco.
Yeah. So clearly, like the city needs different solutions, and hopefully we can proactively propose some. Yeah. So that's all I have to say. Do you have any closing thoughts? Or?
No, I think it was good. Looking forward to future city council meetings to build on a lot of what we talked about, and you know, maybe we can continue on some of the other concepts like the HART discussion. Yeah, totally. Yeah. Awesome. So yeah, until then, see you guys next time. Thanks. Cool. Later. Okay, I'm gonna guess 37 minutes.
Ooh, I'm gonna guess 40.